Essentials, a 3-part guide to teaching for an AI future. I'm your host and speaker, Christina Kahlberg, and I'm super excited to be chatting with you today. Before we dive in, let's get familiar with the chat feature you see on the right side of your screen. If you don't mind, just drop a little hello and where you're from and which university you're with so we can get familiar with each other. Hello. I'm in San Diego, sunny San Diego. So I'm in California. I'm excited to be here and share with you all the information that I've learned kind of by doing this the hard way. Oh, it's wonderful. Oh, Mesa College, you're right down the way. I teach there as well. So I'm with Point Loma Nazarene University. We're here in right on the cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, but we also have satellite campuses at our junior colleges here in California. So I also teach in the JC Community College program, and I also teach in the MBA program that we have. Oh, it's nice to see everybody from all over. All right, I'm going to dive in real quick because we have a lot to cover, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions. So this webinar is intended to be both informative and interactive. So please jot your questions down as they come. I'm going to go ahead. I typically take questions as I go, but this information I'm going to be sharing with you, it's the 7 dimensions of critical thinking. I'm going to actually walk through all of those, which is going to be the lion's share of the time we'll spend today. So I'm going to walk through that and I'll take your questions more at the end. So be sure to jot it down as you go so we don't forget anything. If we don't get to all the questions today, we're more than willing and happy to send out answers to those questions after the webinar as well. So drop the questions in. Don't be shy. All right, let me ask you a question. How many of you 5 years ago thought you would be tuning in to this webinar? A webinar on an AI future. I know I didn't anticipate that. 5 years ago, I was just trying to make it through COVID as an educator. I was trying to learn everything that era offered to us and our students, right? And I feel like as soon as I was getting a handle on the hybrid approach and more of the digital asynchronous teaching, all of a sudden ChatGPT made its big debut and sort of, in my opinion, threw a wrench in higher education again, right? It was like I was just getting comfortable again, just settling in, and now I've got to learn this. And I'll tell you, I did not start going down this path because I wanted to. I always start every single time I talk on this topic, letting the audience know this was not where I saw myself. But what happened is we have an advisory board made up of local, regional, and national experts that actually speak into our curriculum from industry so that we ensure that we are relevant, current, all of those good things that you need. And so our advisory board came to me specifically. I teach digital marketing, content marketing, which are really speaking and writing courses. Most of my content and the learning objectives are actually centered around writing and oral communication. And so they came to me and said, Christina, listen, I'm not going to hire your students just because they have a degree. If they don't know, at that time, back in fall of 22, it was prompt engineering. That was the big skill. And as time has evolved quickly, the skill now is not just prompting, but it's, do you know how to use these tools ethically? Are you still learning how to critically think through the task that you're to complete? Are you still exercising problem solving, right? Those skills that are fundamental to any career, any discipline, and that really are honed in during higher education. And so that's what things have evolved to. And the reason why I've continued down this path is because as I dove in, because when I was told my students weren't going to have a job, that hit me to my core. I want my students to both have knowledge, but also practical experience. And it's very important to me and our university that our students are successful post-graduation. So I sort of was motivated to dive in and start using chat. And since then, of course, I've used almost all of the platforms that are out there because I wanted to help my students continue to develop a competitive advantage, so that in this very tumultuous and difficult economic time that we find ourselves, that my students would have the ability to still be marketable, to still have a competitive advantage, and to still have the skills that are fundamental to any discipline. The other reason I kept going is because I had so much fun with my students. My very first AI assignment that I put into my class in fall of 22 was write a blog using chat. And I got to tell you, I had so much fun with that assignment, and I got so much more out of my students. I got a higher level of analysis, of critically thinking through the objective that I was trying to get them to achieve, as well as the content they were writing. And we were able to do so much more, and we had so much fun doing it. And I had these deep conversations about critical thinking, problem solving, achieving objectives, learning, that I was having so much fun I couldn't stop. And so everything I'm going to teach you, or not teach you, everything I'm going to share today is really what I've learned by trial and error, as well as a ton of research. So I've also been doing research on this since it started because I wasn't sure, was it going to stick around? And sure enough, it is in a very large way. So why don't we go ahead and dive in? I'm going to share my screen. And then I'm going to share my slides. These will be available to you, but let's go ahead and get into the core of what we're going to learn today. So I am the author of the new courseware, which is titled GenAI Essentials. And what I'm going to do, this is a 3-part webinar. Today, we're going to focus on critical thinking. Next webinar will be on ethical decision-making. And the final one, we're actually going to preview the courseware for you in a more tangible way. So for right now, I'm going to focus on critical thinking because as I continued to work with my students and to do research out in industry and out in the field, what I realized is most anyone was simply just using any GenAI tool. Chat obviously is by far the most prominent one that is used. They were just going into chat, not really understanding the outcome that they needed to generate through their own human intelligence, and then also utilizing and leveraging the artificial intelligence in these technology tools, right? They weren't really thinking through what the outcome was. And so what I noticed was there was a big gap in critical thinking and actually evaluating the outputs that you get in GenAI and combining your human touch, which means you're leveraging both human intelligence along with artificial intelligence. I actually am not a big fan of that word. In my research that I've published, we call it an alternative source of intelligence. And so I prefer to use that terminology because I look at GenAI like another team member or a digital assistant that I have access to 24/7. And so really we're harnessing and leveraging human intelligence and an alternative source of intelligence to keep up with the demand in our discipline, to be more productive. And truly what I have found in my research is we are able to exercise critical thinking. And you're going to see a lot of similarities in how we used to do it prior to AI and now how we do it with AI. So I'm going to jump into that. Let's go ahead and dive in, and we're going to focus on critical thinking in this human GenAI era. And so I'm going to go over the 7 dimensions first. Then I'll talk a little bit about the integration, how you can integrate this courseware and what that looks like. And then I'll preview both some main concepts and our contributors. So let's dive in. First, what I want to say is I have developed this with a very experienced instructional design expert who's actually at Stukent, and her name is Anne-Michelle Lavangi, and I saw her. She's on this webinar. So what existed before her and I and another one of my colleagues at Northeastern Illinois University, Dr. Agapian, in Chicago, what the three of us have done over the last almost 2 years is we took the original 6 dimensions of critical thinking, we added a 7th dimension to it, and I'll show you that actually next. And what we've done is we've compared how you can walk your students in higher education through the 7 dimensions of critical thinking with the one new one that we've developed in order to get them to continue to develop this skill in any course that might be offered in higher education. So the first dimension is interpretation. And this honestly has to do with comprehension, right? If we don't understand the task that we're trying to complete, which, let's be honest, a lot of college students, unfortunately, we think that we've provided really great instructions, and we have, but they don't have the level of experience to fully comprehend what we're trying to get them to do. And so prior to AI, you'll notice that a lot of the interpretation or the comprehension that was occurring was obviously very individual, very solo analysis, and it was building incrementally, right? And that's one of the things I noticed when I first started using AI was I was actually able to get my students to understand what I was trying to get them to do sooner, quicker, easier. Why? Because with AI, it actually accelerates comprehension because you have a natural language processing technology that understands human language at a very high level. And it is another alternative source of intelligence to it to help students interpret the information that they've been given. And so I encourage my students tremendously to use these tools to better understand what I'm asking them to do, right? Have you ever heard, I'm confused? I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. One of the first things I say now is, you know what? Read my instructions, go put it into the tool of your preference, and then let's have a conversation and see what you're still missing, right? And what I found is I have less conversations trying to explain my instructions because they now have a tool that's accelerating their comprehension. The second dimension of critical thinking is actually the dimension that we added in, my colleagues and I that have been researching this. It's information literacy. And I want to pause and I just want to say something really here. We've been working with our student populations both in California and Illinois. I've also replicated this research in Ohio and Florida as well. I'm open to any other student population as well. But what we've done is we've actually been able to survey the reliance on GenAI before we teach our students what it is and how to use it both responsibly and ethically, and these 7 dimensions of critical thinking. And then we survey after. This is all self-reported data. And what we have found, as well as an industry, there's a lot of reports coming out just recently, actually, that are affirming our higher education research, which is this. When students understand and know how to use AI, they're actually less reliant on the tool to complete a task. And that directly impacts this dimension of critical thinking. Why? Because we're able in teaching the proper use of these tools, the most effective use of these tools, in teaching them that and allowing them to practice in a low stakes environment in our classroom, we're able to get them very quickly to understand when to use these tools and when not to. And what the research and the literature shows is oftentimes students do the reverse of what we think. We think if we teach them how to use these tools, they're going to become more reliant, but that's actually not the case. In any of the research that I have found, both in my professional research and also the reports that have been coming out in industry, right? Because now there is a tool to synthesize, right? Big data has been something we've been talking about for years now, right? There is so much data, so much information out there. How do I synthesize it quickly? Again, to help me understand what I am trying to do. And that's what information literacy is all about. Now there's a tool that students have to help them synthesize human-sourced information along with the new information that's generated through that tool, whether it's Chat, Perplexity, Claude, or whatever their preference is. The third dimension is analysis. Now, this is an existing dimension that has been around for a long time, right? And here, really what we're trying to think about is the information that we're gathering for any task to complete, is it credible? And so what we've seen without AI support, this is what students are doing. They're examining ideas, they're examining expert opinions, and they're trying to distinguish between facts and opinions. Like, I don't know about you, but one of the questions I get often prior to AI was, how do we know what a credible source is of factual information on Google? Right? So that kind of already existed, and that's what our students were going through. How do I know what is credible? Well, now with AI, they're distinguishing facts from hallucinations, because we know that these tools are limited. We know that they still have work and development to do. And so now students are still utilizing this dimension of critical thinking. Even if you allow them to use GenAI, they're just doing it in a slightly different way. They're not asking how credible, what source on Google is credible, but what they're taking is the information in the output, and they're wondering, is this credible? And now I'm actually going to take a second step, and I'm going to go to the other tools, Google Scholar, the library, right, all the traditional sources, and I'm going to cross-reference the information that I receive from GenAI with the information I receive through traditional methods, and I'm going to critically think through, how much of this output can I use versus how much of it is trash, right? So we're still seeing that this dimension is very much so being used, even if they're using a GenAI tool to help complete a task. The fourth dimension is evaluation. And here, what we're really looking for, we're evaluating whether the information is relevant to the task we're completing, to our discipline, to our industry, right? Is this relevant information? And so in the evaluation process, what we're doing is, as you can see, very similar. And I hope that you can see that. It's one of the reasons I like to juxtapose without AI and how students were using these dimensions of critical thinking next to how they're still using critical thinking. It's similar in a lot of ways, and then in some, it is slightly different, as I just described. In the evaluation dimension, we see that it's actually very similar, right? So without AI, they're still evaluating the quality and relevance of the information, the sources, the evidence that they're gathering, right? They're judging the relevance of that information, and they're checking to see if that source, either on Google Scholar, in the library, is it biased? And what should I know about that before I use the evidence or information? With AI, they're actually doing the same thing. They're evaluating the reliability of this output. And how do they do it? Well, they have to go cross-reference and check credible sourced information that also exists, right? They're determining whether what AI gave them is relevant. And this is where the prompting skills really come in. I see in this dimension of critical thinking, this is where my students take a little extra time. They will use the refinement prompt pattern, and they will refine their prompt 5, 10, 15. Sometimes they can't refine the prompt enough to get something that is relevant in terms of an output. So I have sometimes students just ditch the technology and they go back to the traditional sources, but they're still critically thinking and using this skill and developing this skill, which is the point that I hope you're seeing. In addition, the more that we give AI literacy, the more information to our students that we give them about these tools and the biases that they have, the more likely they are aware of those biases. Like, for instance, in my class, we have to do a lot of presentations and oral communication. And so one of the tools that my students have been experimenting with is Prezi's built-in AI tool. And Prezi, if you prompt it, like for instance, I prompt it, please create a presentation for day 1 of my class. I'm a woman professor with 2 boys. that's been teaching this number of years, and then it does it. Well, its bias is that a professor in the United States is male, not female. And so I have my students see that. And then every time in whatever task we're doing, I will have them tell me, what are the biases you're seeing? Are you seeing anything? And so they're, again, utilizing this skill as they evaluate the output that's provided. So again, I'm not allowing my students to just simply complete the task. I am requiring them and infusing these 7 dimensions of critical thinking so that they are really thinking through those outputs and how much is useful and how much is not. And do I stop with this output, or do I have to continue and go to traditional sources to enhance the deliverable that I'm going to be submitting? The 5th dimension is inference. So this is where we're making some conclusions, right? We're going to draw some reasonable conclusions, make some hypotheses, and kind of put everything together. And in this particular dimension, without AI, you're formulating hypotheses. With AI, you can actually generate those hypotheses. And I've seen students do better work using GenAI because, again, their comprehension is accelerated here. So you can kind of see these dimensions start to blur and actually work together and work in tandem to enhance the student's ability to deliver work that is average and above average. They're still drawing conclusions and they're still identifying consequences. But with AI in this particular dimension, what I teach my students is, especially like in finance, accounting, computer science, engineering, you are required to be able to know the source of the information for a conclusion that you come to. In those fields in particular, it's extremely important. And so what I tell my students is, if you don't know where the original source of the information that's in an output from any GenAI tool, for some fields, there's incredible downstream effects of that. Like, for instance, in finance or accounting, you may not pass an audit. Then what does that do for your business? So these are the kinds of conversations that we're having, and they're using this dimension slightly different from prior to AI and now with our tools, but yet still looking at what are those consequences in my particular discipline. And this is what we walk students through in this particular courseware. The 6th dimension is explanation, right? You've got to be able to explain how you're adding your human touch. And so this is really one of the areas that I love, but you have to articulate the results that you get prior to AI. But with AI, you have to edit and make modifications, right? The output itself is not sufficient. And so in this dimension, they're able to tell me why did I use this part of the output? Why did I not use this part of the output, right? They're justifying the edits that they're making to make it their own work, so that they're not relying on just simply the tool to complete the task. Do some students still do that? Absolutely. I'm a big fan of chasing learning and chasing the students that want to develop their critical thinking skill in this way. And that's really what I try to focus on. So I worry a little bit less of the students that are not going to walk through these 7 dimensions, because the truth is, in the market, they're going to end up being marketed out of a job because they don't have this skill, which is one of the most it's one of the most in-demand skills that we're seeing in the marketplace today. And then the final dimension of critical thinking is self-regulation. And I think this one's a really, really important one. I know prior to using GenAI in my classroom every single semester, because again, my class is mainly a writing class, I would give students a 0. Why? Because they would copy and paste something off of Google and they would plagiarize it as their own. I'm doing less of that actually now that I allow my students to use GenAI, and that I'm teaching them how to ethically and responsibly use it and to be transparent when they do use it. So part of self-regulation, one of the things that's really important, and we very much so cover this in the courseware, is we do not want students to be over reliant on these tools. What we are trying to teach them and have them practice is when to use these tools, and more importantly, when not to use these tools. When is it going to require more editing than what it's truly worth it? When are you going to not be able to understand the original source of the information, like coding? Right? You need to know where that original source comes from so you can assure that it is actually accurate coding and not going to break. If you can't do that, well, then maybe that task isn't the task to use these tools on. There are other tasks that it excels at that you don't have long or downstream effects, negative effects of. So this is where that self-regulation, right? Just because I can doesn't mean I should. So really what we're able to have students practice prior to getting out into the marketplace is when to use these tools and when not to. And I can guarantee you, I talk with industry every single week. I'm in this space and there's loads of companies. In fact, only a quarter of companies actually believe that they've implemented any type of AI or Gen AI tool effectively. So that means 75% of companies are still struggling with this, just like we are in higher education. And so I talk to industry all the time, do a lot of consulting in this area, and they're wrestling with the same things. They know that they're not going to use Gen AI for everything, but they're wrestling with what do we use it for and when do we use it and not use it. And those are the types of things that we cover in this courseware that I've not seen in other courseware that's available. And so your students are really going to be an incredible asset when they go into the marketplace, having gone through this curriculum. So let's dive into what does the curriculum look like? Well, we are going to launch early. So as you can imagine, this is a moving target, and Stukent and myself, we just wanted to get this in the hands of educators to help, right? I have been having to collate all this information myself. I've spent endless amounts of time and energy trying to put this together for myself and my students. And our heart really was, we need to get this in the hands of as many educators as possible, so you have the resources to be able to help students be career ready in this new AI future that we are seeing and we're already in. So we're going to launch in 2026 with 9 chapters. As I mentioned, we're going to have a heavy focus on critical thinking, along with some theories that relate, like task to fit technology theory, cognitive demand theory. There's theoretical implications, and so you'll have that as an educator to walk your students through. We then dive in a very deep dive into the ethical, legal, and policy considerations that are happening right now. We also look to the future, and this courseware will be updated every single semester. So this is a moving target. We know that it's something that is not a one and done. And so we're committed to do what we need to do on the back end to ensure that this information is relevant for you every single semester. We have 2 chapters on prompt engineering. So we have one that introduces them to the smarter framework, which is how they can wrap their heads around prompting. And then we introduce them to prompt patterns and what those look like. We introduce a myriad of tools because, as I mentioned to you, we do not want any one person or student to be reliant on one tool. Neither does the marketplace, because chat is not functional for every task. It simply isn't. It's functional for some, and for others, it's not. And so we go through and we compare and contrast, and we do all of this for the students. And then we dive into prompt engineering actually by type of Gen AI. And we have focused on 6 in this courseware. So we do text, image, video, audio, coding, and multimodal. So we actually do all 6. And we dive in deeper in terms of how to prompt for each specific type. The really amazing thing that I love is that we've come alongside experts, not just myself, in various industries. And so the scenarios and the case studies and the prompting that the students are going to practice is a myriad of disciplines. So we have education represented. We have nursing and healthcare, science, biotech, engineering, computer science, business, the creative industries, administrative tasks, because some of our students find themselves in admin roles, especially right out of college. So we're trying to do as much as we can in this courseware to cover as much of the marketplace as we can. So again, your students are as ready as possible. I also want to pause real quick before I go into the Simternship. This courseware is designed hopefully for students that enter higher education, freshmen and sophomore. What I'm seeing across the country is I'm seeing more and more universities creating a general AI class as an elective right now. It might be required as GE at some point, but right now most of the universities are providing it as an elective. It's packed. Every university I've talked to who has done this, including my own, it's packed. In fact, it usually has a wait list of students because students know that this is the future they're walking into and they want this information. And so this courseware is designed a little bit more upstream. And so hopefully students as freshmen and sophomore would take this foundational class and they would get all the essential knowledge and practical experience needed for any industry. And they would really be able to have a well-rounded view of what the marketplace is looking for as it relates to this topic. And then the hope and the goal is that after taking this class, students would go to their upper division classes and they would then practice the higher level skills that are required for the discipline that they are going to be going into. So right now, because that doesn't exist across the board, this is really where Stukent is kind of first to market in this. They're really pushing for more universities to offer this as the first class that students would take. Because honestly, this is not sufficient in and of itself, right? This is a skill that is going to require a lot of repetitive practicing for our student population to actually be skilled in it and to have that competitive advantage in whatever industry that they go into. So the way it works in my university right now is this is going to be, we're actually using a special topic, special elective course. We'll be introducing this courseware as a general knowledge base. And then that way, like myself, when the seniors, I teach a senior only content class. When the seniors come to me, I don't have to spend time in that class going over all of this. I get to dive right into, let's build a custom GPT and train it to develop original content for real world clients, right? So I get to really dive into that. We touch on those things. We touch on chatbots, GPTs, agents, how to build them, best practices, bot building. And then we also end our 9 chapters with the CEO of Boodlebox, France Hong. He's one of our contributors, and I'll show you him in just a second. And he's got sort of the brainchild. He's an educator at West Point, as well as a technology CEO and developer. So he has kind of the best of both worlds. And what he's done is he's created a human AI collaborative framework for how to work and what that looks like. And so that's how we end the 9 chapters that will be launching in 2026. There will be an additional 3 chapters that will come out in 2027. But again, we know that we want to get these in the hands of you as soon as possible. Our Simternship, we are going to have a Simternship. Right now, it is going to have 6 modules. And so students will get to practice applying the 7 dimensions of critical thinking. They're going to get to they'll be assessed on their prompt engineering and how well that output is ethically and responsibly used to complete the task that they're given in the scenario. Each module is a different industry. So we are trying to make this as broad as possible for as many students and as many educators as possible. So we have 6 modules, and we use that text, image, audio, video, code, and multimodal. So they're going to get practice in all of that. as well as they're going to get a lot of really great experience. And so that will be launching as well in 2026. All right, so you probably want a few assignments. How do you do this now, even before the courseware comes out? I wanted to give you some tangible pieces of information that you can take away in case you do want to start infusing those 7 dimensions of critical thinking into your class. We try to make these as general as possible so that you can modify it slightly to be your specific discipline. But this is a fun one. Students love this. And this obviously is focusing more on comprehension and preparation for students, right? And these, of course, are tasks that every student, regardless of discipline, is going to have to do in their higher education career. So this is one example of an assignment. I'm going to show you, this is just step 1. This is the initial scenario that I would give my students. This is actually step 2. I'm a big fan of think, pair, share. I think it works both for synchronous and asynchronous classes. I've done it in both, and it's been very successful. So then what I want them to do is I want my students, again, I am intentionally infusing and requiring students to critically think through their use of GenAI and the output to achieve a specific learning objective. And so I have them think through that, write down their thoughts for every single step. I pay close attention to biases, how relevant the information is, and how credible. And then I force them to tell me, how do you know it was credible? And that tells me whether they took that second step to actually cross-reference, right? And then if I'm in class, I'll pair them with their partner and they'll discuss. And then if I'm not, if it's an online class, I'll have them write a post on a discussion board, and then I'll have them respond to each other. And then share, what's your conclusion? Was this a good use of GenAI for this learning objective? Maybe, maybe not. And I like to mix that up. I like to give them ones where it's not and where it is. All right, this is the second, or this is another, you can do a reflection as well. So you can do the think, pair, share, or you can do a reflection, or you can do both if you have the time. All right, assignment number 2. This we call breaking the tool. Students love this. They get really excited by this. I actually received this idea from one of our contributors. She does this in her University of Miami creative writing class. I have several of my engineer colleagues here on campus. They do this as well. Can you break the tool? So you can do this in whatever way works for you in your industry. We use the Smarter framework. It is a framework, and I'm gonna preview this in the next webinar. It goes hand in hand with our ethical framework that we've developed as a part of this courseware. So I require students to use that framework that they've learned. So we're trying to break the tool. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this. I'm just suggesting this one. This is the one I've done, and it worked well in my classes. And then step 2 is I had them document. What were the issues? What were the problems that you ran into? What do you think should be the guardrails, right? What do you think? Because these students, they're living in this, and they have a lot of ideas. And I find it very helpful to actually learn from them as well as them learning from me. And then can you test any improvements? Can you refine your prompt? Is there any way that you can correct the problem? Is there anything like that that you might be able to do? And then here I have them both document kind of how they went through that process, but then I also have them do a reflection. So this one, I actually do step 1, 2, and 3. And again, I have found that I can modify this to work both synchronously and asynchronously. And as you can see, I'm always drawing the students back to the 7 dimensions of critical thinking, really trying to get them to develop that skill in such a way that they can use it in their cover letter to truly say that they have the ability to critically think through the ethical and responsible use of GenAI. These are our contributors. The really unique part about this courseware is that it's not just my voice. And these are not ghostwriters. So it's not going to be, there isn't content that has come from these contributors that I'm facing as though it's me. That's not happening. So you're actually going to get all this expertise in the courseware. We felt it was really important when I partnered with Stukent that this not just be one voice, right? This is a field now that is widely diverse and that requires multiple perspectives. And so we have intentionally put this together for you. The goal is to continue to seek out contributors. So if you're interested, please drop that in the chat, your information. I'll be able to reach out to you. But we are going to continue to develop expertise in this area. We're launching with these particular contributors. And Michelle Lavangi, as I mentioned to you, she's an expert in instructional design. She has a diverse background, not just at Stukent. She's been wildly helpful in coming up with these 7 dimensions of critical thinking and how we intentionally apply that to this particular courseware. Martin Jones, Dr. Jones, he is the new Associate Dean in the College of Business and Economics. He's a professor of AI, law, and ethics. He's going to be implementing this courseware as well. He brings his both legal as well as higher education experience to our ethical policy and legal consideration chapter. He also is the brainchild behind the Smarter framework for prompting. I put everybody's LinkedIn. I would encourage you to go follow these individuals. They are brilliant. They are constantly posting relevant information related to how we in higher education are trying to do this in a way that is both helpful and useful for us as well as for our students. Marcia Gomez, she's at the University of Miami. She's actually in the communications department. And she also is the president and founder of her own communications company. She uses these tools as well as uses them and teaches about how to do this in her classes. So really happy that she's decided to contribute with us as well. We have 2 more, Dr. Randall Schober. He's a tenured professor of management. He actually is the brainchild behind the new Bloom's taxonomy for AI. So we have a lot of his expertise in here in terms of how we think about this from a theoretical, as well as from a educational perspective. And then, as I mentioned to you, France Wong, he's the CEO at Boodlebox. He's also a visiting lecturer at West Point. And he is the one that came up with how humans and AI are going to collaborate in the workforce. And what does that look like? And what should students be prepared to know? And that is the end. So let's take some questions. Yes, Boodlebox is amazing, isn't it? Let me try to go through this. All right. Do students have to pay a subscription to the tools? They have to pay just like in any Stukent tool, or I'm sorry, any Stukent courseware. So that you can either get just the textbook, or you can do the textbook and the simulation or the Simternship together. So it's not a subscription, it's just a one-time fee at the beginning of the semester. Good question. Do students use free version of the AI tools? So yes, right now with your courseware, I use whatever free tools my students have. Same everywhere else. Now, I do know a lot of universities are rolling out either Copilot or Gemini for free. My university is a Gemini university. And so most universities have a free tool. Students are more than welcome to use that one. What they're really learning in this class is that practice of prompt engineering, but it's all that additional AI literacy knowledge behind it as well. Do you offer the Simternship package to universities? I will let Lincoln and Stukent answer that one with you. What is the duration of this 9-chapter book? So typically you would do 1 chapter a week. I do think like in ethics, you could do 2 chapters, you could do 2 weeks for that 1 chapter. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to develop courseware that could could be implemented in either an 8-week course or a 16-week course. Obviously, in an 8-week course, it's going to be quick. And there's a lot of information. I know that's part of the overwhelming process of this. So it'll be quick. You may have to decide what you add and what you don't add, or what you don't have time to cover. And obviously, in a 16-week course, this is going to integrate nicely, and you'll have more time to do 2 weeks for like ethics, which I think is a big one. 2 weeks for prompt engineering, which is a big one. 2 weeks for the different gen types, right? The different outputs that you can get. So it's flexible. It's intended to be integrated for 8 weeks or 16 weeks. Yes, we will be sharing the presentation with you. Yes, together, the textbook and the Simternship should last a semester, and again, intended for 8 weeks or 16 weeks. There is a description of the course. We don't have, in the syllabus, we do have that. And it looks like Lincoln did answer that. I love this. How does one get to be a professor of AI? That's a great question. I've seen more of those popping up. I think it's twofold. What I'm seeing is that you're helping your university, your campus, integrate AI across campus, so in various disciplines. And then you're generally giving the knowledge needed at the base level for students to know how to do this responsibly and ethically, get some practical experience, and then move on to their upper division levels to practice at a deeper, or to do a deeper dive. How you become it, I will tell you, every professor I know that has that title, which has just been happening in the last, I'd say, 6 months, it was through their LinkedIn posts. Deans, provosts, they either were introduced at a conference and then followed the educator on LinkedIn. And that's where I'm seeing most of these positions actually be filled. Yes, so we're 2026. We're hoping to launch early 2026. There is a wait list. And if you just type in, I think it's here. Yeah, it's there. Join the wait list. So you can join the wait list there. Yes, more contributors, please. Please send me your information. In fact, I'm going to type my email right here. I'm also on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message there, Christina Kahlberg, or my email is ckahlberg@pointloma.edu. The courseware, the textbook, and the sim, they are going to be available separately, and they'll be available as a bundle. Price range will be similar to all of Stukent's products, but I'll let them speak on that a little bit more. Yeah, so the assignments, if you're interested in more information about those assignments, I typically don't share student work, but I'd be happy to do that individually where I have their names and all of their identifiers removed. So go ahead and email me. I'd be happy to. I've been helping educators all across the country, and I usually do that one-on-one via email. So I've been working it with Pepperdine and Tulane, and I'm always happy to share the information. I just don't do it publicly with all the identifiers. But yeah, what are some of the lessons that they have learned? Great question. So, and I would say this is with any assignment. It's not really specific just to assignment 2. But what the biggest key lesson and takeaway that they learn is, one, prompting is hard, that you do actually have to intentionally develop that skill. The more that you use the frameworks and the patterns and all of the knowledge that's been poured into proper prompt engineering, the more likely you are to get something useful. Or if you're trying to break it, right? If you're trying to break the tool, most of my students aren't successful in breaking the tool because they stay very surface and their prompting is not very effective. So that's the first key takeaway. And I would say, again, it's like in any assignment, the key takeaway is this is harder than it seems. And I do actually need to learn how to do prompt engineering. So that's the first. The second, what they learn is how it hallucinates. So what they learn is that you can't just ask it to write your paper. It's not effective because it will start repeating itself. It will add in information that's not accurate or not even reflective of what was in your prompt. So that's a big one. And I love it because the more I let them use this in my classes, the more they become aware. And so the follow-up lesson that they learn is that it's not useful for every task. Now, I will tell you, it's different for every person and every student. I could have a room full of 50 students and they will all have different answers in terms of how they use the tools and what they find it to be most effective for. I have also experienced that with my peers, right? So I don't try to funnel students into a specific use. What I try to do is get them to critically think and assess and then come to their own conclusion as to what works for them and what doesn't. I'll just give you, for instance, I have really great writers. They don't use the tools for writing. It's faster for them to write than it is to try to edit and output and make it their own. It takes more time to do that. So as I let them use these, or as I let them use the tools, and I have many assignments in my class. So I just showed you a couple, but I've got lots. And so as they progress, and usually it's around the 8-week mark, all of a sudden the light bulbs go off. And now they can tell me very specifically which tasks they use AI for and which ones they don't. Research is a big one. So that's another key lesson that they learn, is that if there's any task they have to do and they're not really sure what to do, it's a great starting point. It's not the end point. That's the lesson learned. They typically have to go find credible sources because we know that not all of the sources are, or that the content in the output, even if they provide a source, it doesn't always match. So what I do is I tell my students, go click on every single one of those sources in Perplexity, for instance. And I want you to find that statistic in that source, or I want you to find that fact in that source. And about half of the time, we can't, because either the tool inflated the statistic or the piece of data, or it's just simply not there. So that's the other key lesson, is they find that it's not very accurate all the time. And this is why when I said the more students know AI literacy and the more practice they have, the more likely they are to not rely on these tools for every task. All right. I see that there's going to be a lot of talking, a lot of connecting afterwards. That's wonderful. If there are any other questions, maybe our admin, if you see something that I missed, will you please put it into the chat for me? If you haven't tried BoodleBox, I am not a paid representative. I'm not anything. I've used a lot of tools, and I will tell you, BoodleBox is an incredible technology company because they have licensed the major GenAI tools: ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, Cohere, Gemini, Pi. All of the major ones they have licenses for. And so my students, we primarily use BoodleBox. We're not a BoodleBox university yet, I'm working on that. But what it allows is that I have students now in the assignments is I'll say prompt chat for this task. Then I want you to prompt Claude. And I want you to compare and contrast. I want you to use those 7 dimensions of critical thinking. And I want you to determine which GenAI tool produced more relevant information that was more credible and in congruence with the task you're trying to achieve. So if you haven't checked out Boodlebox, I encourage you to do it. I now only use Boodlebox because I have access to all of the tools in one. The other reason why I use it, we get into this in the courseware, is the environmental impact is less with Boodlebox. So if you just use chat, the environmental impact is greater than it would be for Boodlebox. That's a whole other thing we can talk about, which I don't have time to get into. We do talk about that in the courseware because we want students to understand what the computing power requires of the environment so they can make their choices as to what they want to do and how they want to move forward using these tools. Yes. So have you heard about the different AI tools now sharing data with each other? Yes. This is the wild, wild west. There's a lot happening. As I mentioned to you, this courseware, we very intentionally designed it as an introductory course, knowing that in every field and every discipline, students are going to require consistent, repetitive, and higher level learning and practice. So this is just where they're going to start so that those in upper division courses don't have to spend so much time and energy teaching them the basics and can really dive into that higher level knowledge and practice. All right. I don't think there are any other questions. I don't think that I have missed anything. Admin hasn't put anything in. So thank you for coming. I appreciate you. I'm going to preview ethical decision making and our ethical framework that we have developed for this courseware. I will preview that next time in the next webinar as a part of this series. Thank you so much, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the fall semester.